The contractions were coming every 3 minutes now, each one a wave of fire that made Claire Harrison grip the hospital bed rails until her knuckles turned white. The fluorescent lights overhead felt too bright, too harsh, illuminating every bead of sweat on her forehead as she tried to remember the breathing techniques from her prenatal class. "Where's he?" the nurse asked gently, adjusting Claire's foreline. "Your husband?" Claire closed her eyes against another contraction, her teeth clenched. "He said he had a meeting. He'll be here soon." But even as she said the words, doubt curled in her stomach alongside the pain. Marcus had been distant for months now, ever since she'd started showing. The man who'd once traced her pregnant belly with reverent fingers had begun flinching away from her touch, staying late at the office, taking calls in the other room with hushed, urgent tones. The delivery room door swung open and Claire's heart leaped with hope. But it wasn't a doctor or Marcus. It was a courier in a brown uniform, holding a manila envelope. "Claire Harrison?" he asked, checking his clipboard. "I'm in labor," she managed through gritted teeth. "Can this wait?" "I just need a signature, ma'am. Time-sensitive legal documents." The nurse took the envelope with a disapproving frown. "She's having contractions every 3 minutes. Come back later." "Can't, ma'am. I was told this needed to be delivered immediately, regardless of circumstances." Claire's hands trembled as she signed the electronic pad, her signature a shaky scrawl. The moment the courier left, another contraction hit, this one strong enough to make her cry out. Through the haze of pain, she heard the door open again. This time it was Marcus. He stood in the doorway in his tailored Armani suit, looking like he'd stepped out of a board meeting. Which, Claire realized with a sinking feeling, he probably had. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tie precisely knotted, his expression carefully neutral. "Marcus," she gasped, reaching out her hand. "Thank God. The baby's coming." The doctor said, "I know." His voice was cold, clinical. He didn't move from the doorway. "Claire, we need to talk." "Now?" Another contraction seized her, stealing her breath. "Marcus, I'm literally in labor. Which is why this needs to happen now, before things get more complicated." He stepped into the room, and for the first time, Claire noticed he wasn't alone. Sienna Vale glided in behind him like she owned the place. 26 years old to Claire's 32, with platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves over her designer dress. She was Marcus's executive assistant, the woman Claire had convinced herself not to worry about despite the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the perfume that sometimes clung to Marcus's collar. "What is she doing here?" Claire asked, her voice rising with panic and pain. Sienna didn't answer, just stood there with a small, satisfied smile playing at her lips as Marcus approached the bed. He was holding papers now, Claire noticed. The envelope the courier had delivered. "Marcus, I don't understand." "The baby, open it," he said, thrusting the envelope at her. Claire's hands shook as she pulled out the documents. The words swam before her eyes, made worse by another contraction that made her vision blur. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed by Marcus James Harrison against Claire Elizabeth Harrison. "Divorce papers," she whispered. "You're serving me divorce papers while I'm in labor with your child? Our marriage has been over for months, Claire. You know that." Marcus's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings. "I'm just making it official. But the baby will be well provided for. I've already discussed custody arrangements with my attorney. Every other weekend, holidays alternating. Very standard." Claire stared at the man she'd married 5 years ago, the man who'd promised her forever. He looked like a stranger. "There's someone else," she said, her voice breaking. "It's her, isn't it?" Sienna stepped forward, her hand possessively on Marcus's arm. "Marcus and I have been together for 8 months. We're in love." 8 months. Claire had been 6 months pregnant when it started. The betrayal hit harder than any contraction. "You've been cheating on me this entire pregnancy?" Claire's voice cracked. "While I was carrying your baby, you were—" "Don't be dramatic," Marcus interrupted. What Sienna and I have is real. What you and I had was just convenient. Until it wasn't. Another contraction seized Claire, this one strong enough to make her cry out. The nurse moved to check her dilation, her face tight with disapproval. "Sir, you need to leave," the nurse said firmly. "This is completely inappropriate. Your wife is about to give birth." "Soon-to-be ex-wife," Marcus corrected. "And I'll leave as soon as she signs the papers. My attorney assured me that service during labor is legally binding in this state." Claire looked down at the divorce papers through tears of pain and heartbreak. The room spun. She was dilated to 8 centimeters, the nurse had just told her. The baby was coming whether Marcus stayed or left, whether her world was falling apart or not. "Marcus, please," she begged. "We can talk about this after. Please don't do this now. Sign the papers, Claire." His voice was granite. "You'll get a fair settlement. The house in Connecticut, alimony for 3 years, child support. You won't suffer financially." "I don't care about the money," she screamed, and then another contraction hit, the strongest one yet. "Doctor," the nurse called. "We need Dr. Chen now." As medical staff flooded into the room, Marcus thrust a pen at Claire. "Sign it. The sooner you sign, the sooner I can leave and you can focus on what matters." Claire's hand moved almost mechanically, shock and pain overriding rational thought. She scrawled her signature across the bottom of the page, barely able to see through her tears. "Good," Marcus said, already backing toward the door. Sienna was waiting for him, her smile triumphant. "My attorney will be in touch about the details. Take care of yourself, Claire." And then they were gone. Just like that, as if the past 5 years had meant nothing. As if the baby currently forcing its way into the world was just another item on his to-do list. "Push," Dr. Chen commanded, suddenly there at the foot of the bed. "Claire, I need you to push." She pushed through tears and rage and heartbreak. She pushed while nurses murmured sympathetically. She pushed while her world shattered and reformed around the singular fact that she was doing this alone. At 11:47 p.m., Claire's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the delivery room. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect, screaming fury. "She's beautiful," Dr. Chen said, placing the baby on Claire's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Claire looked down at her daughter's scrunched-up face, her tiny fists waving in protest at this bright, cold world. "Elizabeth," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Your name is Elizabeth Grace." The baby's eyes opened, unfocused but searching, and something in Claire's chest cracked open. She'd lost Marcus, lost her marriage, lost the life she'd thought she was building. But this little girl in her arms was everything. A different nurse entered, carrying a clipboard and wearing an apologetic expression. "Ms. Harrison? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." "I don't want to see anyone," Claire said, unable to tear her eyes from Elizabeth's face. "He says he's from Peterson, Caldwell and Associates. Says it's about your father's estate." Claire's head snapped up. "My father? He passed away 3 weeks ago, ma'am. I'm very sorry for your loss. The attorney says you didn't respond to their letters or calls, so they traced you here. 3 weeks ago. Right around the time Marcus had started being even more distant, more cold. Right around the time the courier had shown up with divorce papers while she was in active labor." "Send him in," Claire said quietly. The attorney who entered was in his 60s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Harrison? I'm Robert Caldwell. I'm deeply sorry for your loss, and I apologize for the timing, but my father and I haven't spoken in 10 years, Claire interrupted. "Not since I married Marcus against his wishes." "Why are you here?" Robert Caldwell sat in the chair beside her bed, his briefcase balanced on his knees. "Because your father never stopped caring about you, Ms. Harrison. And because he left you everything." "Everything?" Claire laughed bitterly. "My father was a mechanic. He owned a small garage in Pennsylvania. There is no everything. Your father, Robert said carefully, was Arthur Harrison. Does that name mean anything to you? Claire frowned. His name was Art Harrison. He fixed cars. He also founded Harrison Technologies in 1987. Before you were born, before your mother passed away, your father was one of the pioneers in data encryption and cybersecurity. When he sold his majority stake to VentureCore in 2010, the deal was valued at $1.2 billion. The room tilted. Claire clutched Elizabeth tighter, certain she'd heard wrong. That's impossible. My father lived in a tiny apartment above his garage. He drove a 1995 pickup truck. He lived very simply after your mother died, yes. He was devastated by her loss and found solace in simple work, simple living. But he never liquidated his assets, Ms. Harrison. He just let them grow. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. When Harrison Technologies merged with CyberShield last year, your father's remaining holdings were consolidated. The current value of the Harrison estate is approximately $2.5 billion. Billion, Claire repeated numbly. With a B, Robert confirmed. And it's all yours, Ms. Harrison. Every penny, every asset, every property. Your father's will was very specific. In the event of his death, everything goes to his only child, Claire Elizabeth Harrison. Claire looked down at her newborn daughter, then at the divorce papers still lying on the bedside table, then back at Robert Caldwell. Does Marcus know? Your husband? Robert's expression grew carefully neutral. I attempted to contact you at your home address first. A Mr. Marcus Harrison answered the door. I identified myself and explained that I needed to discuss your inheritance. He informed me you were in the hospital and that he was no longer interested in your affairs. Robert paused. I did not disclose any financial details to him. So Marcus knew she'd inherited something. He just didn't know what. Miss Harrison, Robert continued gently, there's something else you should know. 3 weeks ago, the day your father passed, someone accessed your email account from an IP address registered to Harrison Media Group, your husband's company. They read all the correspondence from our firm regarding the estate. Claire's breath caught. Marcus read my emails? It appears so. And approximately 6 hours after that breach, we received a call from a law firm representing Marcus Harrison, inquiring about the specifics of Arthur Harrison's estate and whether any assets would be considered marital property. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marcus had known she was inheriting something. He'd tried to find out what. When he couldn't get specific numbers, he'd moved fast to divorce her before the inheritance was finalized, probably hoping to claim half of whatever it was. He'd served her divorce papers during labor not despite the timing, but because of it. He'd calculated that she'd be too vulnerable, too distracted, too overwhelmed to think clearly about what she was signing. He'd underestimated her in every possible way. Mr. Caldwell, Claire said quietly, her voice steady for the first time since Marcus had walked into the delivery room, I'd like to discuss my options. Over the next hour, while Elizabeth slept peacefully in her arms, Robert Caldwell outlined the full scope of Claire's inheritance. It wasn't just money and accounts. It was a controlling interest in 3 major tech companies, commercial real estate in 7 states, a venture capital fund worth hundreds of millions, and intellectual property rights that generated passive income of roughly $4 million per month. Your father lived simply because he wanted to, Robert explained, but he built an empire for you. He always believed you'd come back to him eventually, and he wanted to make sure you'd never need anyone when you did. Claire thought about the small apartment she'd shared with Marcus, the way she'd pinched pennies and clipped coupons while he spent freely on himself and Sienna. She thought about the times she'd asked him to skip expensive business dinners so they could save for the baby's college fund, and he'd laughed at her for being provincial. There's one more thing, Robert said. Your father had a clause added to his will 6 months ago, shortly after he learned about your pregnancy. If you were to divorce within 1 year of his death, the inheritance would be placed in an irrevocable trust for any children you might have, with you as the trustee. Marcus would have no claim to any of it. He knew, Claire whispered. My father knew Marcus would leave me. Your father was a very astute man, Ms. Harrison. He made his fortune by being an excellent judge of character. As Robert left with promises to return in the morning with more documents, Claire sat in the quiet hospital room, her daughter sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed, and felt something shift inside her chest. The grief and betrayal were still there, still sharp and painful. But underneath them was something else. Something that felt like steel wrapped in silk. Marcus Harrison thought he'd divorced a nobody. A woman with no money, no power, no options except whatever scraps he decided to throw her in the settlement. He was about to learn that the woman he'd served divorce papers to while she was in labor, the woman he'd humiliated and betrayed, was now worth more than his entire company, his entire fortune, his entire existence combined. And Claire Harrison was just getting started. 2 weeks later, Marcus Harrison stood in his corner office at Harrison Media Group, feeling pretty damn good about his life. The divorce from Claire was proceeding smoothly, she'd signed the papers without a fight, just like he'd predicted. Sienna had moved into his penthouse, and her youth and energy made him feel powerful again. At 38, he'd been worried about becoming irrelevant, but Sienna's adoration reminded him he was still in his prime. His phone buzzed with a text from his attorney, settlement conference scheduled for next week. Claire's attorney requesting meeting first. Routine stuff. Marcus smirked. Of course Claire's attorney wanted to meet. They probably wanted to negotiate better terms, maybe push for 5 years of alimony instead of 3. He'd anticipated this. Hell, he might even be generous and give it to her. The guilt about serving her papers in labor had faded, replaced by satisfaction that he'd handled it efficiently. Darling? Sienna appeared in his doorway, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Claire spent on groceries in a month. Lunch reservations at the Capitol Grill in 20 minutes? Perfect. Marcus grabbed his jacket. I'm starving. His phone rang as they were heading to the elevator. Unknown number, but Marcus answered anyway. Could be a new client. Mr. Harrison? This is James Chen from VentureCore Holdings. Marcus frowned. VentureCore was massive, they had stakes in everything from tech startups to media companies. How can I help you, Mr. Chen? Actually, I'm calling to inform you that VentureCore has acquired a controlling interest in Harrison Media Group. The transaction was finalized this morning. Marcus stopped walking. That's impossible. I own 67% of Harrison Media. You own 67%, Mr. Harrison. Our records show that shares were purchased through multiple investment vehicles over the past 6 months. As of 8 a.m. this morning, VentureCore Holdings owns 51% of your company. The elevator dinged. Sienna was already inside, looking at him impatiently. Marcus waved her on, his heart pounding. Who authorized this? He demanded. I have veto rights on all major stock sales. This violates, the sales were conducted through legitimate market transactions, Mr. Harrison. Various shareholders sold their stakes voluntarily. All perfectly legal. James Chen's voice was professionally neutral. We're calling to inform you that the board will be meeting tomorrow morning at 9 to discuss restructuring. Your presence is requested but not required. Restructuring? What the hell does that mean? It means VentureCore has different priorities for Harrison Media Group's future direction. We'll be evaluating all current leadership positions. The call ended. Marcus stood in the empty hallway, his mind racing. This was a hostile takeover. Someone had been quietly buying up his company from under him, and he'd had no idea. His phone buzzed again. His CFO, Tom, we need to talk. Now. Conference room. The conference room was full of grim faces. Tom, the CFO. Jennifer, the COO. David, head of legal. All of them looked like they'd just witnessed a car crash. Tell me this is some kind of mistake, Marcus said. It's not a mistake, Tom replied, pulling up a presentation on the screen. Someone's been systematically acquiring Harrison Media shares for 6 months. They moved through shell companies, investment funds, private equity, all completely legal and nearly impossible to track until it was too late. How much are we talking about? 51%. They own controlling interest. As of this morning, Marcus, you report to VentureCore Holdings. Marcus sank into a chair. Who's behind VentureCore? David, the lawyer, cleared his throat. That's where it gets interesting. VentureCore is owned by a larger parent company called Harrison Technologies Group. Harrison? Marcus's head snapped up. As in your wife's maiden name, yes. Or your ex-wife, technically. David pulled up more documents. Harrison Technologies Group is a privately held entity. The sole owner and CEO is listed as Arthur Harrison's estate, managed by trustees. Claire's father. Marcus felt sick. But he was a mechanic. He owned a garage in Pennsylvania. He also founded Harrison Technologies in 1987, Jennifer said quietly. Sold it for over $1 billion. I just found the articles. Marcus, Claire's father, was one of the pioneers in data encryption and cybersecurity. The room spun. Marcus thought about the small apartment Claire had lived in when they met, her second-hand furniture, her modest job at the museum. She never said anything. Maybe she didn't know, Tom suggested. The timeline suggests Arthur Harrison died about 3 weeks ago. Maybe she knew. Marcus's voice was cold. She had to have known. This is revenge. For what? Jennifer asked, then colored when everyone looked at her. I mean, I'm not trying to be insensitive, but what exactly would Claire be taking revenge for? Marcus thought about serving divorce papers during labor. About Sienna standing there with that smug smile. About how he'd calculated the timing to maximize Claire's vulnerability, to make sure she'd sign without thinking too hard about the terms. It doesn't matter, he said finally. What matters is protecting my position. I'm still the CEO. I built this company. They can't just, actually, David interrupted, they can. The board meeting tomorrow isn't a formality, Marcus. With 51% ownership, VentureCore can replace you if they want. They can restructure the entire company. Marcus's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Harrison? A woman's voice, crisp and professional. This is Rebecca Chen from Pacific Heights Capital. I'm calling regarding your penthouse at the Millennium Tower. What about it? Pacific Heights Capital purchased the building this morning. We're contacting all residents to discuss lease renewals and potential rent adjustments. I don't rent, Marcus snapped. I own that penthouse. Outright. Actually, Mr. Harrison, our records show the penthouse is held in a trust, the Harrison Family Trust. As the building's new owner, we've invoked a clause in the trust agreement allowing us to terminate the occupancy arrangement with 60 days' notice. That's insane. You can't just, we can, and we are. You'll receive formal notification within the hour. We're offering you first right of refusal to purchase the unit at current market value, which our assessors have determined to be $2 million. Marcus had lived in that penthouse for 4 years, ever since Claire had insisted they needed to save for a down payment on a house in Connecticut. He'd purchased it through a trust for tax purposes, never imagining the building itself could be bought out from under him. Who owns Pacific Heights Capital? He asked, already knowing the answer. We're a subsidiary of Harrison Technologies Group. Have a good day, Mr. Harrison. The phone went dead. Marcus looked around the conference room at the faces of his executive team, seeing his own panic reflected in their expressions. It's her, he said. Claire is systematically dismantling my life. Over the next 72 hours, Marcus watched his world collapse in slow motion. Harrison Media Group's board meeting was a bloodbath. The VentureCore representatives were polite but implacable. They thanked Marcus for his service, praised his vision for building the company, and then voted him out as CEO. He was offered a generous severance package and a consulting position that everyone in the room knew was essentially being paid to go away quietly. Sienna took the news about the penthouse badly. What do you mean we have to move? I just had my entire closet customized. The building was sold, Marcus explained for the third time. We have 60 days to vacate or come up with $8.2 million to buy it outright. So buy it. You're a millionaire, Marcus. What's the problem? The problem was that most of Marcus's net worth had been tied up in Harrison Media Group stock, which was now controlled by his ex-wife's estate. The problem was that his liquid assets were nowhere near enough to purchase the penthouse outright. The problem was that everything was falling apart and Sienna's whining was making it worse. I need to think, he said, pouring himself a scotch at 10 in the morning. His phone rang. His attorney, Paul Mitchell. Marcus, we need to talk about the divorce settlement. What about it? Claire's attorney just submitted a motion to nullify the agreement you had her sign. Marcus's hand tightened on his glass. On what grounds? On the grounds that you served her divorce papers while she was in active labor, which they're arguing constitutes duress and unconscionability. They're claiming she wasn't in a mental state to consent to legal documents. That's ridiculous. She signed them. It's binding. Marcus, Paul's voice was gentle but firm, you served your wife divorce papers while she was having contractions. You brought your mistress to the delivery room. Any judge is going to be sympathetic to Claire's position. So what happens if they nullify the agreement? Then we start over with divorce proceedings. But Marcus, there's more. Claire's attorney also filed a motion for full disclosure of assets. They want to know every detail of your finances, your income, everything. Why? Because Claire just inherited $2.5 billion from her father's estate, and they want to make sure you have no claim to any of it. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. Billion? With a B? With a B, Arthur Harrison was apparently one of the richest men in tech. He kept it quiet, lived simply, but the estate is massive. And because he died before your divorce was finalized, there's a question about whether any of it could be considered marital property. Marcus sank onto the couch, his scotch forgotten. How much of it is marital property? Theoretically? None of it. Inheritances are typically separate property. But if Claire agrees to a settlement where you waive all claims to her inheritance, they might be willing to negotiate better terms on everything else. Better terms? Paul, I gave her a fair settlement. Marcus, you served her divorce papers while she was in labor so you could marry your pregnant wife's replacement. There's no settlement generous enough to make that look good to a judge. After Paul hung up, Marcus sat in silence, processing the magnitude of his miscalculation. Claire wasn't just fighting back. She was systematically destroying every advantage he thought he had. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, tomorrow, 2 p.m., for Seasons Hotel, Presidential Suite. Come alone. Claire. The meeting. Marcus arrived at the Four Seasons 15 minutes early, his palms sweating despite the cool air conditioning. A man in an expensive suit met him in the lobby. Security, Marcus realized, though he was dressed like a corporate executive. Mr. Harrison? Please follow me. The presidential suite was enormous, all floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city skyline. Claire sat on a cream-colored sofa, her daughter sleeping in a bassinet beside her. She'd lost the pregnancy weight, Marcus noticed. She looked elegant in a simple black dress, her dark hair styled professionally, wearing jewelry he'd never seen before. Standing behind her was an older man Marcus recognized from news articles, Robert Caldwell, managing partner at one of the country's most prestigious law firms. And seated in the armchair to Claire's right was a woman who made Marcus's heart sink, Margaret Chen, the ruthless corporate attorney who'd destroyed more than one Fortune 500 CEO in court. Thank you for coming, Claire said, her voice polite but distant. Please, sit down. Marcus sat in the chair across from her, feeling like he was facing a firing squad. Claire, I know you're angry, but I'm not angry, Marcus. Claire's tone was almost gentle. Anger would require me to still care about your feelings. I don't. Then why am I here? Because we need to discuss the terms of our divorce. Claire nodded to Margaret Chen, who opened a folder. "Mr. Harrison," Margaret began, "my client is prepared to offer you a very generous settlement. Full custody of your daughter Elizabeth, with you receiving supervised visitation every other weekend. No alimony, given that my client's financial resources far exceed yours. Child support calculated based on your current income, which we understand has recently changed." Marcus flinched at the mention of losing his CEO position. "Claire, you can't actually expect me to agree to supervised visitation with my own daughter. You served me divorce papers while I was in labor, Marcus." Claire's voice remained calm. "You brought your mistress to my delivery room. You've seen your daughter exactly twice in 2 weeks, both times for less than an hour. Why would I trust you with unsupervised custody? I'm her father. You're a sperm donor who's been playing house with his secretary." Claire's composure finally cracked, showing the steel underneath. "Elizabeth deserves better than weekend visits where Sienna's around, pretending to be her mother." Marcus looked at Robert Caldwell, then at Margaret Chen, trying to find an opening, a weakness. "What if I don't agree to your terms?" "Then we proceed with a full custody battle," Margaret replied smoothly. "Which will involve extensive discovery into your fitness as a parent. Your affair, your financial mismanagement, your decision to serve divorce papers during labor, it will all become public record. Every detail. Every text message. Every hotel receipt. You're blackmailing me." "We're offering you a choice," Claire corrected. "You can agree to reasonable terms that allow you to maintain some relationship with your daughter and some dignity in the press. Or you can fight, and we'll make sure every person in America knows exactly what kind of man you are." Marcus thought about the media coverage, about Harrison Media Group, which he no longer controlled, covering the story. About Sienna's reaction when their affair was splashed across every news outlet. "There's one more thing," Claire said quietly. "VentureCore Holdings, the company that now owns Harrison Media, is prepared to sell the company back to you." Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" "For $1. Claire smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "We'll sell you back 51% of your company for $1, Marcus. Your life's work, everything you built, returned to you for less than the cost of a coffee. What's the catch? You resign from all positions immediately. You sign a non-compete agreement preventing you from working in media or tech for 5 years. You agree to seek therapy for narcissistic personality disorder, verified by a licensed psychiatrist of our choosing. And you sign over full custody of Elizabeth with no visitation rights for the first year of her life." The terms hit Marcus like bullets. "You want me to give up my daughter? I want you to prove you care about something other than yourself." Claire leaned forward, her eyes hard. "You can have your company back, Marcus. You can rebuild your empire, prove you're the brilliant businessman you think you are. All it costs is 1 year without seeing your daughter. 1 year to get your life together, to do the work to become someone worthy of being her father. And if I say no? Then VentureCore keeps the company. We install new leadership, new direction, new vision. Harrison Media Group becomes just another acquisition in the Harrison Technologies portfolio. And you get nothing." Marcus looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, completely unaware that her future was being decided a few feet away. He thought about holding her in the hospital, how small and perfect she'd been. He thought about Sienna's reaction when he'd gotten home that night, how she'd wrinkled her nose at the idea of a crying baby disrupting their lives. He thought about his company, about 15 years of work, about his reputation and his legacy. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "You have until 5 p.m. today," Claire replied. "After that, the offer expires and we proceed with litigation." As Marcus stood to leave, he paused. "Claire, for what it's worth, I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Claire picked up her daughter, holding Elizabeth against her shoulder with practiced ease. "You served me divorce papers while I was in labor, Marcus. You brought your mistress to watch. You stole my joy, my dignity, my trust. And you did all of it calculating that I had no power, no resources, no way to fight back. She looked at him with eyes that showed no forgiveness, only cold assessment. You were right that I had no way to fight back then. But you were wrong about what I'd do once I could. This isn't about revenge, Marcus. It's about making sure you understand that actions have consequences. And that underestimating someone is the most expensive mistake you can make. 3 months later, Claire Harrison stood in the boardroom of Harrison Technologies Group, looking out at the skyline of Seattle where her father had started his empire 40 years ago. Elizabeth slept peacefully in a carrier against her chest, apparently unfazed by her mother running multiple billion-dollar companies while she napped. Marcus had taken the deal. Of course he had. He'd signed over his parental rights for a year, resigned from Harrison Media, and entered therapy. Claire had kept her word. VentureCore sold him back his company for $1, and he was slowly rebuilding what he'd almost lost. But he was doing it without Sienna. She'd left him 2 weeks after he signed the agreement, unable to handle the scrutiny and the reduced lifestyle. Last Claire heard, Sienna was dating a hedge fund manager in New York, already moving on to the next opportunity. Robert Caldwell appeared in the doorway. The board is ready for you, Ms. Harrison. Thank you, Robert. Claire adjusted Elizabeth's carrier and picked up her presentation materials. Let's talk about the future. As she walked into the boardroom, the same one where her father had made the decisions that built this empire, Claire felt a profound sense of completion. She'd spent 10 years running from this legacy, thinking she could be happy with ordinary. She'd learned that ordinary was just another word for settling. Marcus had taught her that. By betraying her at her most vulnerable, by calculating that she had no power, by serving her divorce papers and labor, he'd inadvertently given her the push she needed to reclaim everything she'd walked away from. The board members stood as she entered, 12 of the most powerful people in tech, all watching her with varying degrees of respect and curiosity. 3 months ago, they'd wondered if Arthur Harrison's daughter could handle the responsibility. Today, after she'd orchestrated a hostile takeover of Harrison Media and successfully navigated 3 major acquisitions, they knew the answer. Good morning, Claire said, her voice carrying the quiet authority her father had possessed. Let's begin. Elizabeth stirred against her chest, making small sounds, and Claire felt her daughter's heartbeat against her own. This was what mattered. Not revenge, not proving Marcus wrong, but building something that would last beyond any of them. Her father had known that. He'd lived simply, worked quietly, and built an empire in the shadows because he understood that real power didn't need to announce itself. It just existed, steady and unshakable, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Marcus had gambled that Claire was powerless. He'd lost that bet in the most spectacular way possible. But more than that, he'd lost the chance to be part of something extraordinary. He'd traded his daughter's first year for a company, not realizing that the real fortune was walking away from him in a hospital delivery room, crying her first cries while he was too busy destroying his future to notice what he was giving up. Claire looked down at Elizabeth, who'd opened her eyes and was staring up at her mother with that intense, unfocused gaze that newborns have. Your grandfather would have loved you, she whispered. And your father will regret missing this time with you for the rest of his life. But that's his loss, sweetheart. Not ours. She looked up at the board, at the people waiting for her direction, at the empire her father had built and she was now leading into the future. Shall we discuss the future of Harrison Technologies? And as the meeting began, as Elizabeth slept peacefully through discussions of billions of dollars in corporate strategy, Claire Harrison, billionaire, mother, and the woman Marcus Harrison had served divorce papers to in labor, smiled. Some lessons cost more than others. And some mistakes could never be undone, no matter how much money you had. Marcus had learned that the hard way. And Claire had learned that coming home to yourself, to your power, to your legacy, was worth every moment of pain it took to get there.